The verdant forest of Earth, once ravaged by technological excess, now thrived in its rebirth. Kyle Avrilian stood at the edge of a clearing, his keen eyes scanning the lush canopy. 220 years of life had honed his senses to a razor's edge, yet nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. A rustle in the undergrowth caught his attention. Kyle's muscles tensed, ready for action, a reflex born from centuries of survival. But what emerged from the foliage was no threat, at least not in the way he expected. A woman stepped into the clearing, her skin a mesmerizing shade of blue that seemed to shimmer in the dappled sunlight. Kyle's breath caught in his throat. Her beauty was otherworldly, quite literally. She moved with a grace that belied her alien nature, each step purposeful yet fluid. "Greetings, child of the stars," Kyle said, his deep voice resonating through the clearing. He fought to keep his tone neutral, to hide the sudden surge of emotions her appearance had triggered. The blue-skinned woman turned to him, her eyes widening in what appeared to be surprise. "You must be Kyle," she said, her voice melodious and tinged with wonder. "I've heard so much about you." Kyle's eyebrow arched. Legends of the old man in the forest still circulate, do they? He couldn't help but smirk, amused by the thought. Old man? The woman's gaze roamed over him, taking in his muscular frame and youthful appearance. "But you look—" "Appearances can be deceiving," Kyle interjected, a wry smile playing on his lips, "especially when you're 220 years old." The woman's jaw dropped, and Kyle felt a surge of satisfaction at her genuine shock. It had been a long time since he'd been able to surprise anyone. "I'm Laura," she said, recovering quickly. "I'm an explorer from a distant world. I've come to learn about Earth's history and its mysteries." Kyle nodded, his interest piqued. "Well, Laura, you've certainly come to the right place. Though I warn you, some mysteries are better left unsolved." Laura stepped closer, her movements deliberate and alluring. "I'm not afraid of mysteries, Kyle. In fact, I find them irresistible." Kyle felt a jolt of electricity run through him at her proximity. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Well then, shall we begin your education on Earth's history?" Laura's lips curved into a smile that was both innocent and provocative. "I thought you'd never ask." As they walked deeper into the forest, Kyle found himself constantly glancing at Laura. Her blue skin gleamed in the sunlight, and her perfectly proportioned figure moved with an almost hypnotic grace. He tried to focus on the task at hand, showing her the wonders of the reborn Earth, but his mind kept wandering. "So, Kyle," Laura said, breaking the silence, "how does a man live for 220 years and still look so vital?" Kyle chuckled, a sound that rumbled deep in his chest. "That, my dear, is a long and complicated story, one that involves a lot of pain, sacrifice, and more than a few mad scientists." Laura's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "I have time," she purred, her hand brushing against his arm in a way that seemed far from accidental. Kyle felt his pulse quicken at her touch. It had been so long since he'd allowed anyone to get close to him. The weight of his years, the burden of outliving everyone he'd ever cared about, had left him isolated. But something about Laura made him want to lower his guard. "It all started during the great technological age," Kyle began, his voice taking on a distant quality as he recalled events from centuries past. "Humanity had reached its zenith, or so we thought. We believed we could conquer death itself." As Kyle spoke, Laura listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face. She nodded at the right moments, asked insightful questions, and seemed genuinely fascinated by his tale. But beneath her attentive exterior, her mind was racing, cataloging every piece of information for her true mission. They walked for hours, Kyle showing Lara the hidden wonders of the forest, ancient ruins reclaimed by nature, secret groves where rare plants grew, and crystal-clear streams that sang with life. As the day wore on, Kyle found himself opening up more and more, sharing stories and insights he'd kept locked away for decades. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, they arrived at a small cabin nestled in a secluded glade. "This is my home," Kyle said, gesturing to the rustic structure. "It's not much, but it's served me well over the years." Lara's eyes roamed over the cabin, taking in every detail. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "So peaceful." Kyle nodded, a hint of melancholy in his voice. "Peace is a rare commodity when you've lived as long as I have. This place, it helps me remember what's important." Lara turned to him, her eyes shimmering with an emotion Kyle couldn't quite place. "And what is important, Kyle?" He met her gaze, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Life," he said quietly. "Connection. Things I thought I'd lost the capacity for long ago." A moment of charged silence passed between them. Lara took a step closer, eliminating what little space remained. "Maybe you just needed the right person to remind you," she whispered. Kyle felt his resolve weakening. Every instinct honed over centuries of solitude screamed at him to pull away, to protect himself from the pain of inevitable loss. But Lara's presence, her warmth, her intoxicating scent, it all conspired to overwhelm his defenses. Lara's hand came up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. "I can feel it beating," she said, her voice husky. "So strong, so alive. How can you hide all this vitality away in the forest?" Kyle's hand covered hers, his touch gentle but firm. "The world out there, it's not ready for someone like me. The secrets I carry, the power I possess, it's safer for everyone if I remain hidden." Lara's other hand came up to cup his cheek, her touch sending shivers down his spine. "But is it safer for you, Kyle? To live your life alone, cut off from everything?" Kyle closed his eyes, leaning into her touch despite himself. "I've tried connection before, Lara. It always ends the same way, with me standing over a grave, watching another piece of my heart turn to dust." When he opened his eyes, Lara's face was inches from his own. Her eyes bore into him with an intensity that took his breath away. "Then maybe it's time to try something different," she breathed. Before Kyle could respond, Lara closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that ignited every nerve in his body. For a moment he was too shocked to respond. Then, with a groan of surrender, he pulled her closer, returning the kiss with 2 centuries of pent-up passion. When they finally parted, both breathless, Lara's eyes danced with triumph and something else, a glimmer of genuine emotion that surprised even her. "Human," she said, her voice a mix of challenge and desire. "Stop staring. It's time to act, not to dream." Kyle laughed, a sound of pure joy that he hadn't experienced in decades. "As you wish, my star-born temptress," he said, sweeping her into his arms and carrying her towards the cabin. As the door closed behind them, the forest fell into a hushed silence, as if holding its breath. The night that followed was one of passion, of rediscovery, of 2 souls connecting across the vast gulf of space and time. But as Lara lay in Kyle's arms, watching him sleep in the pale light of dawn, a pang of guilt twisted in her chest. Her mission, her true purpose for being here, weighed heavily on her mind. She had come to deceive, to extract secrets that could change the fate of worlds, Instead, she found herself falling for the very man she was meant to betray. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the cabin's windows, Lara made a decision. She would complete her mission, but not in the way her masters had intended. She would protect Kyle, protect the secrets he carried, and in doing so, perhaps find redemption for herself. Little did she know, the events set in motion by their encounter would soon spiral far beyond her control, shaking the very foundations of Earth and the galaxy beyond. The morning sun streamed through the cabin's windows, casting a golden glow on Kyle's face as he stirred from his slumber. He blinked, momentarily disoriented, before the memories of the previous night came flooding back. A smile tugged at his lips as he reached out, expecting to feel Lara's warm presence beside him. Instead, his hand met cold, empty sheets. Kyle sat up abruptly, his senses on high alert. Had it all been a dream? A cruel trick of his longing mind? But no, her scent still lingered in the air, a sweet, alien fragrance that made his heart race. "Lara," he called out, his voice rough with sleep and a hint of worry. "Out here," came the reply from outside the cabin. Kyle threw on some clothes and stepped out onto the porch. There she stood, her blue skin shimmering in the morning light, looking out over the forest. The sight of her took his breath away all over again. "For a moment, I thought you'd disappeared," Kyle said, moving to stand beside her. Lara turned to him, a complex mix of emotions playing across her face. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. "Too much on my mind." Kyle nodded, understanding all too well the weight of sleepless nights. "Want to talk about it?" Lara hesitated, then asked, "Why do you live so isolated, Kyle? With all your knowledge, your power, why hide away in the forest?" The question hit Kyle like a physical blow. He took a deep breath, his gaze drifting to the distant horizon. "Immortality is a burden, Lara. I've watched everyone I've ever loved die. It's easier to be alone." He felt Lara's hand on his arm, her touch sending a jolt through him. "But is it really living?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kyle turned to face her, his eyes filled with centuries of pain. "I've tried, Lara. God knows I've tried. But every time I open my heart, every time I let someone in, it ends the same way. Me, standing over a grave, feeling another piece of myself die with them." Lara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Kyle, But before she could finish, a distant explosion rocked the forest, sending birds scattering into the sky. Kyle's body tensed, years of instinct kicking in. "What was that?" Lara asked, her voice tight with alarm. Kyle's face hardened into a mask of grim determination. "Trouble," he growled. "Stay here. No," Lara interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. "I'm coming with you." Kyle wanted to protest, to protect her from whatever danger lay ahead, but the look in her eyes told him it would be futile. With a curt nod, he led the way into the forest, moving with a speed and agility that belied his years. As they raced through the trees, Kyle's mind whirled. Who could be attacking? The earth had been at peace for generations, the old conflicts long forgotten. Unless... They crested a hill and the sight below made Kyle's blood run cold. A small settlement, one of the Avrilian outposts he'd established years ago, was under attack. Sleek, alien ships hovered overhead, raining destruction upon the simple dwellings. "No," Kyle breathed, his fists clenching at his sides. Beside him, Lara had gone very still. "Kyle," she said, her voice trembling, I need to tell you something." But Kyle was already moving, charging down the hill towards the battle. "Later," he called back. "Right now, we need to save those people." Lara hesitated for a fraction of a second, her face a mask of anguish, before following him into the fray. The next hours were a blur of chaos and violence. Kyle fought with all the skill and power his long life had granted him, his movements a deadly dance as he engaged the alien invaders. Lara fought at his side, her own abilities a match for his own, their styles complementing each other as if they'd trained together for years. As they battled, Kyle couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The attackers seemed to be searching for something, or someone. Their tactics were too focused, too precise for a random assault. In a momentary lull in the fighting, Kyle turned to Lara. "Do you recognize these ships?" he asked, his voice tight with suspicion. Lara's face paled, her blue skin taking on an almost ashen hue. "Kyle, But her words were cut off as a massive explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet. Kyle stumbled, momentarily disoriented. When he regained his footing, he saw a towering figure emerging from the smoke, a being unlike any he'd ever encountered. "Kyle of Rillian," the figure boomed, its voice seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Your time of hiding is over. Surrender yourself and the secrets you carry, or watch as we reduce this world to ash." Kyle's mind raced. How did they know about him? About the secrets he'd kept buried for centuries? He glanced at Lara, saw the guilt and horror etched on her face, and in that moment, he understood. "You," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You led them here." Lara's eyes filled with tears. "Kyle, please, let me explain." But Kyle was already moving, putting distance between them. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound he'd suffered in his long life. He'd opened his heart, allowed himself to feel again after so long, and this was the result. "Why?" he demanded, his voice raw with pain and anger. "Was it all a lie? Everything we shared?" Lara reached out to him, her face a mask of anguish. "No, Kyle, please believe me. It started as a mission, yes, but what I feel for you is real. I never meant for this to happen." The alien leader's laughter boomed across the battlefield. How touching. The immortal fool, betrayed by love once again. "Will you never learn of Rillian?" Kyle's jaw clenched, his eyes never leaving Lara's face. "You're right," he said, his voice cold. "I should have known better." With that, he turned away from her, facing the alien leader. "You want me?" he called out, his voice ringing with challenge. "Come and get me." The battle that followed was unlike anything Earth had seen in centuries. Kyle fought with all the fury and skill his long life had granted him, his movements a blur as he engaged the alien forces. But even his incredible abilities were tested to their limits against such overwhelming odds. Lara, torn between her duty and her growing feelings for Kyle, found herself caught in the middle. She fought alongside Kyle, trying desperately to prove her loyalty, but the trust between them had been shattered. As the battle raged on, Kyle found himself backed into a corner, surrounded by alien forces. He prepared for what might be his final stand, centuries of life flashing before his eyes. Suddenly, Lara's voice cut through the chaos. "Kyle, duck!" Without thinking, Kyle dropped to the ground. A blast of energy sailed over his head, taking out the aliens that had been closing in on him. He looked up to see Lara standing there, her weapon still smoking, her eyes wild with determination. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything, but please, let me help you. Let me make this right." Kyle hesitated, years of pain and betrayal warring with the feelings he'd developed for Lara. In that moment of indecision, the alien leader made his move. A beam of energy lanced out, catching Kyle square in the chest. He stumbled backward, his immortal body struggling to cope with the alien technology. As he fell, he saw Lara racing towards him, her face a mask of horror and determination. The last thing Kyle heard before darkness claimed him was Lara's voice, raw with emotion. "Kyle, no, I love you." Then everything went black. When Kyle regained consciousness, he found himself in a dimly lit chamber, his body restrained by some form of energy field. The alien leader loomed over him, its features hidden beneath an ornate helmet. "At last," the alien said, its voice dripping with satisfaction. "The secrets of immortality will be ours." Kyle's mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. Where was Lara? Had her declaration of love been real, or just another part of her deception? As if summoned by his thoughts, Lara's voice rang out from the shadows. "Let him go." She stepped into view, her blue skin gleaming in the low light, her eyes blazing with determination. In her hands, she held some kind of alien device. The leader turned to her, surprise evident in its posture. "Agent Lara? What is the meaning of this?" Lara's gaze never left Kyle's face as she spoke. "I was wrong. We were all wrong. The secret to immortality isn't something that can be stolen or replicated. It's not about living forever. It's about what you do with the time you have." She raised the device, her finger hovering over a button. "And I choose to use mine to make things right." The alien leader lunged for her, but Lara was faster. She pressed the button, and the chamber was filled with a blinding light. Kyle felt the restraints holding him dissolve, and then nothing. When the light faded, Kyle found himself back in the forest. Lara collapsed beside him. The alien ships were gone, as if they'd never been there at all. As Lara stirred, groaning in pain, Kyle knelt beside her. His emotions were a turbulent mix of anger, betrayal, and something else. Something he'd thought he'd lost the capacity for long ago. "Why?" he asked simply, his voice hoarse. Lara looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and hope. "Because some things are worth betraying everything for," she whispered. "Some people are worth saving the world for." Kyle helped her to her feet, his touch gentle despite the storm of emotions raging within him. As they stood there, surrounded by the ancient forest that had been his sanctuary for so long, he realized that everything had changed. The world he'd hidden from for centuries had come crashing back into his life, bringing with it danger, betrayal, and perhaps, just perhaps, a chance at redemption. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues, Kyle made a decision. It was time to stop running, time to face the world and whatever it might bring. And as he looked at Lara, he knew he wouldn't be facing it alone. "Come on," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "We have a lot to talk about." Together they walked deeper into the forest, towards an uncertain future that held both peril and promise. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the galaxy, hung in the balance. But for Kyle, after centuries of solitude, the greatest adventure lay in opening his heart once more, in daring to trust, to feel, to live. As night fell over the forest, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if bearing witness to the beginning of a story that would reshape the cosmos itself. The forest whispered ancient secrets as Kyle and Lara made their way through the dense undergrowth. The weight of centuries pressed down on Kyle's shoulders, but for the first time in ages, he didn't feel alone in bearing it. "We need a plan," Kyle said, breaking the tense silence. "Your people won't give up easily." Lara nodded, her blue skin shimmering in the dappled sunlight. "No, they won't. The Syndicate has sought the secret of immortality for millennia. They'll throw everything they have at us." Kyle's jaw clenched. "Then we'll need to be ready for them." They reached a small clearing and Kyle paused, turning to face Lara. His eyes bored into hers, searching for any hint of deception. "I've spent centuries not trusting anyone," he said, his voice low and intense. "Maybe it's time for that to change." Lara's breath caught in her throat. She reached out, her fingers brushing Kyle's cheek. "I know I've given you every reason to doubt me," she whispered. "But I swear, Kyle, I'm with you now. Completely." For a long moment, Kyle said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's hear what you know about their plans." As Lara detailed the syndicate's strategies and weaknesses, Kyle's tactical mind whirred into action. Centuries of experience melded with Lara's insider knowledge, forming a plan that just might save Earth and the legacy of the Avrillians. "It won't be easy," Kyle warned as they finalized their strategy. "We're outnumbered and outgunned." Lara's lips curved into a mischievous smile. "Good thing we have 220 years of tricks up our sleeve then." Despite himself, Kyle chuckled. "I suppose we do." As night fell, they made their way to the Avrillian stronghold hidden deep in the mountains. Kyle's people greeted him with a mixture of awe and wariness, their eyes darting suspiciously to Lara. "She's with me," Kyle said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. "We have a fight on our hands, and we'll need every advantage we can get." The next few days were a flurry of preparation. Kyle drilled his people relentlessly, honing skills that had grown rusty in peacetime. Lara worked tirelessly, modifying their defenses with her advanced knowledge of syndicate technology. Through it all, Kyle found his resolve strengthened by Lara's presence. Her determination, her quick wit, and yes, even her flirtatious banter reminded him of what it meant to truly live, not just exist. On the eve of battle, Kyle found Lara standing alone on the ramparts, gazing up at the stars. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. Lara shook her head. "No. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Kyle's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "I spent so long running from connection, from feeling," he murmured. "I forgot what it was like to have something worth fighting for." Lara turned to him, her eyes shining in the starlight. "Well, old man," she teased, "ready to show these youngsters how it's done?" Kyle's laughter echoed across the night sky. "Oh, you have no idea." Dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of fire and blood. The syndicate's ships appeared on the horizon, a swarm of metal and malice descending upon the earth. Kyle stood at the forefront of his people, Lara by his side. "Remember," he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled defenders, "we fight not just for ourselves but for the future of Earth itself. Stand strong." The battle that followed would be spoken of in whispers for generations to come. Kyle moved like a force of nature, centuries of combat experience unleashed in a whirlwind of destruction. Lara fought with equal ferocity, her knowledge of syndicate tactics turning their own strengths against them. Together, they were unstoppable. Where Kyle's strength faltered, Lara's cunning prevailed. When Lara found herself overwhelmed, Kyle was there, an immovable bulwark against the tide of enemies. But as the battle raged on, the sheer numbers of the syndicate began to tell. The defenders were pushed back, inch by bloody inch. Kyle found himself separated from Lara, surrounded by enemies on all sides. As he fought, memories flashed through his mind, centuries of loss, of loneliness, of running from connection. But now, faced with the possibility of losing everything, he realized how much he had to live for. Just as it seemed the tide of battle would overwhelm him, Kyle heard Lara's voice ring out across the chaos. "Kyle, you're not alone anymore. I'm with you now and always." Those words ignited something in Kyle's chest, a fire he thought long extinguished. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the earth, he surged forward, his strength renewed. Lara fought her way to his side, and together they turned the tide. Their movements synchronized perfectly, as if they'd fought side by side for centuries. The Syndicate forces, faced with this unexpected unity, began to falter. In the heart of the enemy fleet, the Syndicate leader watched in disbelief as his forces were decimated. With a snarl of fury, he engaged his ship's ultimate weapon, a device capable of rending the very fabric of space-time. "If we can't have immortality," he raged, "then none shall have it." As the weapon powered up, reality itself seemed to warp and twist. Kyle and Lara exchanged a single glance, understanding passing between them without words. They knew what had to be done. Racing against time, they fought their way to the enemy flagship. Lara's expertise with Syndicate tech allowed them to breach the ship's defenses, while Kyle's raw power cleared a path through waves of defenders. They reached the bridge just as the weapon reached critical mass. The Syndicate leader turned to face them, his face a mask of hatred and desperation. "You're too late," he sneered. "This world will burn, and from its ashes we will claim the secret of eternal life." Kyle stepped forward, his eyes blazing with the wisdom and pain of centuries. "You fool," he said, his voice resonating with power. "Immortality isn't about living forever. It's about what you do with the time you have." With that, he lunged forward, grappling with the leader as Lara raced to the weapon controls. The ship shuddered and groaned as the fabric of reality stretched to its breaking point. "Lara!" Kyle shouted over the cacophony. "Whatever happens, know that you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever: hope." Lara's fingers flew over the alien controls, tears streaming down her face. "And you've shown me what it means to truly live, Kyle. Thank you." With a final desperate push, Lara reversed the weapon's polarity. The ship imploded, taking the Syndicate leader with it. But instead of destroying everything, it created a localized time bubble, trapping the remaining Syndicate forces in an endless loop. As the dust settled and the survivors emerged from their shelters, they found Kyle and Lara standing atop a hill overlooking the battlefield. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson. Kyle turned to Lara, his eyes filled with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in centuries. "In 220 years, I've never met anyone who's changed my life the way you have," he said softly. "You've taught me to trust again, to love again." Lara's blue skin glowed in the fading light, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "And you've shown me what true strength and wisdom really mean," she replied. "I came here as an enemy, but I'm staying as your beloved." Their kiss was more than just a symbol of love's triumph over deception. It was a new beginning for both of them. Kyle had found a companion for his endless journey, and Lara had discovered her true home and purpose. As they stood there, overlooking the world they had saved, Kyle realized that the greatest adventure of his long life was just beginning. He had spent centuries running from connection, from feeling, from truly living. Now, with Lara by his side, he was ready to embrace it all. "So," Lara said, a hint of her old mischief returning to her voice, "what does an immortal do after saving the world?" Kyle laughed, the sound rich and full of joy. "I have no idea," he admitted, "but I'm looking forward to figuring it out, with you." Hand in hand, they walked down the hill towards the gathering of survivors. The future stretched out before them, full of uncertainty and promise. But for the first time in centuries, Kyle felt truly alive. As night fell and the stars emerged, They seemed to shine a little brighter, as if bearing witness to a new chapter in the cosmic story. Kyle and Lara had not just saved the Earth. They had reshaped the very fabric of existence, proving that love, trust, and the courage to change could overcome even the most ancient of conflicts. In the end, Kyle realized, immortality wasn't about living forever. It was about making every moment count, about finding meaning in connection and purpose in protecting others. And as he looked at Lara, her blue skin aglow in the starlight, he knew that he had found something even more precious than eternal life. He had found a reason to truly live. The forest around them whispered with ancient secrets, but now those secrets held promise instead of loneliness. The legacy of the Avrillians would continue, not as isolated guardians, but as a bridge between Earth's wisdom and the cosmos beyond. As Kyle and Lara stood at the threshold of this new era, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. For in each other, they had found not just love, but a partnership that spanned galaxies and transcended time itself. The stars twinkled overhead, silent witnesses to the beginning of a story that would reshape the cosmos. And in the heart of the ancient forest, two souls, one born of Earth, one from beyond the stars, embraced their shared destiny, ready to write the next chapter in the grand epic of existence. Well, dear listeners, we've reached the end of our cosmic love story, and what a wild ride it's been. I hope you've enjoyed this tale of immortal angst, alien allure, and intergalactic intrigue as much as I've enjoyed spinning it for you. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, this story seems a bit experimental. And you'd be absolutely right. We've taken more twists and turns than a quantum pretzel, and our genre blending has been more adventurous than a Venusian cocktail mixer. We started with a dash of sci-fi, threw in a pinch of romance, added a sprinkle of action, and then tossed the whole thing into a blender set to what in the name of Zorg's tentacles is happening. The result? A story that's part Highlander, part Avatar, and part The Notebook. If The Notebook had laser guns and time bubbles, that is. But hey, that's the beauty of storytelling, isn't it? Sometimes you set out to write a simple tale about an immortal hermit and a blue-skinned space babe, and before you know it, you're knee-deep in existential musings and saving the entire planet from time-bending doom. So, if you found yourself scratching your head at times, wondering if you'd accidentally stumbled into a different story, don't worry. That was all part of the plan. Well, mostly. Okay, about 37% of it was planned. The rest? Let's just call it creative spontaneity. In the end, we learned some valuable lessons. 1. Immortality is overrated unless you have someone to share it with. 2. Blue is definitely the warmest color, especially when it comes to alien skin. 3. Never trust a syndicate with a space-time weapon. It never ends well. And perhaps most importantly, we learned that love can conquer all, even interstellar conflict, centuries of emotional baggage, and questionable plot devices. So, as you close this book, or switch off your holo reader for our more technologically advanced audience members, remember, somewhere out there in the vast cosmos, Kyle and Lara are probably bickering about whose turn it is to save the galaxy this week. Thank you for joining us on this experimental journey through space, time, and the human and alien heart. May your own adventures be just as exciting, but perhaps with fewer existential crises and more happy endings. Until next time, keep looking at the stars. You never know when a blue-skinned beauty might fall from them.